I'm 79 years old, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that most people who read the Bible have never actually read it. They've read around it. They've read the comfortable parts, the parts that were handed to them on Sunday mornings, framed in gold on living room walls, printed on greeting cards. But the scriptures that have stood every test of time, the ones that have survived war, translation, persecution, empire, and the complete collapse of civilizations, those are not the ones that make you feel warm. They are the ones that make you uncomfortable enough to change. And here's what most people miss when they talk about scripture standing the test of time. They think longevity means popularity. They think because a verse has been quoted for 2,000 years, it must be the most important. But a verse can be quoted endlessly and still be misunderstood endlessly. The scriptures that truly stand the test of time are not the ones most frequently cited. They are the ones most frequently lived and most frequently avoided because living them costs something real. Take the book of Job. Most people think they know this story. A righteous man suffers. God allows it. Job complains. God answers from the whirlwind. Job is restored. They think the lesson is patience. They have been told since childhood that Job is a model of patience. But that is a surface reading, and the surface is not where the scripture lives. Job was not patient. Job was furious. Job argued with God, demanded answers, accused the divine of injustice, and refused to accept the comfortable explanations his friends kept offering him. And God, at the end of that book, rebukes the friends, the ones who said all the right religious things, and vindicates Job, the one who dared to be honest. The scripture that stands the test of time is not Job was patient. It is this, that God has more respect for an honest argument than a dishonest comfort. That is a truth that cuts across every century, every culture, every tradition. Pretending to believe something you don't actually believe is not faith, it is performance. And performance has never survived anything, but it goes even deeper than that. The reason Job endures is not because it answers the question of suffering. It doesn't answer that question. It refuses to answer it. And that refusal is the teaching. The whirlwind speech, what är sning mucho stiger, where God asks Job where he was when the foundations of the earth were laid, when the morning stars sang together, that is not a rebuke. It is an invitation into a scale of reality that human suffering, as real and devastating as it is, exists within. The book of Job survives because it refuses to cheapen pain with easy theology. Every century produces new easy theologies. None of them last. Job lasts. Now move to the Psalms, because this is where the scriptures get honest about the human interior in a way that almost nothing else in ancient literature does. Psalm 22 begins with the words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And those words were quoted by a man dying on a cross, which tells you everything you need to know about why they endure. These are not the words of doubt. They are the words of someone in the absolute bottom of human experience, still speaking to God, still addressing the divine, even in the language of abandonment. The psalm does not stay in desolation. It moves. It moves from forsaken to remembered, from crying out to praising. And that movement, that arc from darkness through silence, into something that cannot be explained but can be witnessed. That arc is the structure of almost every genuine spiritual experience ever recorded. It endures because it is true, not theologically convenient. True? And here is what most people miss about the Psalms as a whole. They are not devotional literature in the way we use that word today. We use devotional to mean gentle, uplifting, manageable. The Psalms are raw. Psalm 137 contains a verse so violent that churches quietly skip it. Psalm 88 ends without resolution. It is the only psalm that ends in darkness without a turn toward hope. And that is precisely why it is ministered to people in the depths of grief for 3,000 years. Because sometimes a person in genuine darkness does not need to be told it will be okay. They need to know that their darkness has already been spoken, already been witnessed, already been held inside something sacred. The scripture that survives is the one honest enough to hold what human beings actually experience. The real power is in understanding why the Sermon on the Mount has outlasted every empire that tried to suppress it. The Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, the meek, the mourning, the persecuted. These statements were revolutionary, not because they were kind, but because they inverted every value system of every dominant culture in history. Every civilization rewards the strong, the confident, the victorious, the comfortable. Every civilization. And here's a teaching that says the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who have been broken open. That is not a comfortable teaching. That is a destabilizing teaching. Rome tried to eliminate it. Medieval power structures tried to domesticate it. Colonial Christianity tried to weaponize it into its opposite. And it keeps surviving. Because you cannot domesticate a truth that is structurally opposed to the accumulation of power. The Sermon on the Mount endures not because it is beautiful, though it is beautiful, but because it is permanently, irreducibly counter to what the powerful always want religion to say. Connect this to the deeper principle running through all enduring scripture. What lasts is what is true at the level of human nature, not what is true at the level of human preference. Human preference wants a God who rewards virtue and punishes vice in visible, measurable ways. Human preference wants clear rules and clear outcomes. Human preference wants the religious text to confirm what we already believe. But the scriptures that have stood every test say something harder. They say that the righteous suffer. They say that justice is not always visible within a human lifetime. They say that the poor and broken are closer to the sacred than the rich and confident. They say that loving your enemies is not a metaphor but an actual practice. These are not the things human preference selects for, and yet they survive every attempt to soften them, every attempt to explain them away, every attempt to replace them with something more manageable. The book of Ruth survives because it is about loyalty that costs something, not loyalty when it is convenient. Loyalty after the reason for loyalty is gone. Naomi told Ruth to leave. Ruth had every cultural and legal justification to go back to her own people. She stayed, and that staying, that choosing to remain bound to someone when the bond has already been released, is the kind of love that every human being recognizes in their bones as the highest form of human connection. The scripture endures because it names something we know is real even when we rarely see it. Isaiah 40 has survived because it addresses exhaustion, not sin, not rebellion, not theological error, exhaustion. Even the youths shall faint and be weary. That is in the middle of a passage that has sustained people through exile, through slavery, through every form of collective suffering imaginable, because the deepest human need is not always for correction. Sometimes it is for acknowledgement, for someone to say, I see how tired you are. I see what you have carried. And the verse moves from that acknowledgement into, they shall mount up with wings as eagles. But notice, it does not skip the exhaustion. It goes through it. The scriptures that stand the test of time do not bypass what is hard. They pass through it. Here is the practical application after 79 years of reading these texts. When you want to know if a scripture is enduring or merely popular, ask yourself this. Does it make a demand on me? Or does it simply confirm what I already believed? The texts that have survived millennia are demanding texts. They ask you to love people who have hurt you. They ask you to hold your suffering without a simple explanation. They ask you to consider that the person with less power than you might have more wisdom than you. They ask you to be honest with God rather than performing for God. None of these things are easy. All of them are transformative. The scriptures that stand the test of time are not the ones that make you feel chosen. They are the ones that make you feel accountable, not to a set of rules, but to the full weight of what it means to be human in relationship with something larger than yourself. They have survived because human nature has not changed. We are still exhausted. We still suffer unjustly. We still face the darkness without explanation. We still need to know that our interior life, it's the full, unedited, sometimes furious interior life, has been witnessed and held. At 79, what I can tell you is this. Read the difficult ones. Read the ones that make you argue. Read the ones that do not resolve. Read the ones that demand something of you that you are not sure you can give. Those are the ones that will still be changing people 2,000 years from now. Because truth does not need to be comfortable to endure. It only needs to be true. And there is one more layer here, and it is the deepest one. The reason these scriptures survive is not only because they are true to human experience, it is because they point towards something that does not change even when everything else does. Every civilization that has encountered these texts has tried to use them for its own purposes, and every civilization has eventually collapsed, while the texts remain. That is not a coincidence. That is evidence of something. When you read the Psalms in the original Hebrew or in a translation that preserves their rawness, you are reading words that were cried out in Babylon, whispered in Roman prisons, sung in African slave quarters, held by people in modern hospitals who do not know the historical context but recognize the truth. The words travel because the truth in them is not bounded by the culture that first received them. And the words of Jesus that have traveled furthest: love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you would have them do to you, the last shall be first. These are not traveling because they are pleasant. They are traveling because they describe the architecture of what a functioning human community actually requires. Every civilization that has abandoned those principles has eventually collapsed under the weight of what it built instead. This is not religious argument. It is historical pattern. The scriptures endure because they are describing something real about how human beings can live together and how human beings inevitably suffer when they abandon those descriptions. Martha Jane Watson has spent 79 years watching people pick up the Bible, flip to the verses that comfort them, and put it down again. And I understand that impulse. Comfort is necessary. But the scripture that will sustain you through the real losses, the ones that come for everyone, no matter how carefully you have lived, those are not the comfort verses. Those are the ones that were written by people who had lost everything and were still speaking toward the sacred. Those are the ones that contain enough honest darkness to hold your honest darkness when it arrives. And it will arrive. It arrives for everyone. The test of time is not a gentle test. It is the test of war and famine and grief and injustice and the complete disintegration of everything a person has built their life around. The scriptures that pass that test are the ones worth knowing, not because they will protect you from those things, but because they will keep you human inside them